Jonathan Pageau, thank you for being here.
Oh, it's great to be back. It's great to be back.
Jonathan, from your perception, who or what is God?
God is the infinite source of all things, has all the qualities and no qualities, right? And so it is a paradox, but in some ways, that's the only way to describe the origin of something. Is that in some ways, it's beyond whatever you're describing. So God is beyond all things, but then God is also all in all. And so that's probably the best way of understanding God in a classical theist sense.
What is, I'm sure, have you ever seen the beginning of the movie Zeitgeist? They talk about, have you ever seen that one before, Zeitgeist?
No,
Okay.
no,
So
I
they
haven't
talk,
seen it. I've heard about it, but I haven't seen it.
all right. So one of the things they talk about is the recurrent mythological themes across many religions. There's the virgin birth. There's the birth around December 25th. There's death and resurrection. There's 12 disciples or companions. There's baptism, water initiation, performing miracles, being called the light, the shepherd, the savior, all the things. Which religion is the best out of all of our options? Or is it all the same thing? Like, what are we doing here?
No, it's not all the same things. I mean, I think I remember that speech. I haven't seen the movie, but I know about the speech. A lot of that stuff, by the way, has been debunked in the sense that the best way of understanding that speech. It's actually a best way of understanding that speech might tell you what the best religion is in the sense that the speech is interpreted through Christianity. In some ways, the speech is meant to debunk Christianity because it's there to say, well, these things that Christianity says it exists in every single religion. But the reason why it's doing it is because Christianity has pointed certain things together, kind of brought them together in a certain thread. And I do think that what Christianity offers in some ways is a culmination of the best elements of ancient religious practices. Um, and in some ways it transcends them as well. And so, I definitely am a Christian, so that's where I come from. I do believe that there's value in other religious practices. I do believe that there's value in other religious traditions, and that the similarities that you find are in some ways reflection of these universal patterns, which are just our pattern of attention or the pattern of what we care about, the pattern of what makes us human. But in some ways, what Christianity does is it brings it all together, a lot of the best elements of these stories, and it also makes it brings it down to earth, right, and brings it into a person that existed. So C.S. Lewis talks about the myth that came true. So it has all these mythological structures, but it is also was incarnate in the world and not just kind of up there in the story verse, you could say.
It seems like Christianity is kind of making a comeback right now. It seems like it's becoming like the pendulum swings and people went quite atheistic and I think towards like science and that direction. And it seems like there's like a yearning for something more. It seems like cultures like hungry for something deeper than just materials. And it feels to me like JC is on the rise.
So he's coming back.
It feels
I
like
think
it.
no, I think that that's true. It's funny because in some ways, in 2016, when Jordan Peterson kind of appeared on the horizon, I kind of saw that this was the beginning of something. Like there was something happening. There was something happening in the world. There was, materialism and reductionism was playing out, and that we would see a return of at least religious practice, and hopefully we would see a kind of return to Christianity. And I think we're seeing it now. Like we're seeing the fruits of that. We're seeing young people flood the churches. My particular church is like quadrupled, quintupled, or whatever in the past few years, and you're seeing that happen, especially in the more traditional churches. They're just full with young people. The demographics still show a decline in the sense that there's still more people going out, but the people that are coming in are young and very they're motivated, like you said, to find meaning in a kind of nihilistic world.
How does one differentiate what is symbolic and what is literal in the Bible, just to dissect Christianity specifically?
I think that it's probably best not to, in the sense that the way, at least the way that I think about symbolism, is that symbolism is the pattern of coherence. So things happen, right? but we join them together in patterns. We don't join them. They present themselves to us in patterns, and those patterns are symbolic patterns in the sense that they're coherent patterns, right? So if you want to recognize a story amongst the millions of things going on right now and all the time and nonstop, you have to align facts together in a certain order for them to be coherent and to make sense. And those facts joined together, they create a story, and that story has to be symbolic. That is, it has to be aimed towards the reason why you're telling the story. Right? So if I tell the story of my love life, or if I tell the story of my day, those I'm going to join facts together in a certain structure towards a purpose, and those purposes will tell us what the story's shape is. And so you can't get away from symbolism, because symbolism is the pattern by which you organize facts towards purpose. So in the Bible, all the stories are symbolic necessarily, because in the Bible, let's say in the story of Jesus, nobody's talking about what Jesus ate for breakfast that day. Like nobody's talking about, I don't know, like how he ties his hair, or there are all millions of facts that we could be saying, but we're not saying because we're taking the facts together towards a purpose. And then sometimes that purpose pressures facts, right? It pressures facts to align kind of in the story. So if you're telling your story of your day, you might organize things in a certain way to make sure that the reason why you're telling the story lands. So all of that is true about scripture. So you can't completely differentiate. You can't say that there are some things that in the Bible that are literal and there's some things that are symbolic. Everything in the Bible is symbolic. But there are some things you could say in the Bible that are meant to show you that it happened, that it's something that happened in the world. And there are some parts of scripture that it's not as important to kind of understand that it happened, or that it's using symbolic language without an underlying, how can I say this? So when Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like a seed, he's not necessarily talking about an actual seed one day that was planted in the ground. He's using it as an example to kind of help you understand a certain concept.
What, from your perception, is hell?
Hell or death, like hell, especially hell in the more traditional understanding, is when you aim St. Paul talks about, he says the wages of sin is death. That's a good way of understanding what leads to hell, which is that if you're aiming towards a purpose and you miss the purpose and you misalign, right? You miss the mark. That's what sinning means. Then things start to fragment, right? So if you're aiming towards a purpose, but you're not hitting that purpose, then your actions don't make sense. Your actions don't align. They're misaligned. And therefore they lead to decomposition. They lead to breakdown. They lead to chaos. They lead to pain. They lead to all of these things, right? And there's analogies all across. When your body isn't doing what it's supposed to, right? If it's not hitting the mark, then it also leads to pain, to fragmentation, to all these things. And so hell in some ways is the extreme version of that, right? It's the idea of a loss of all unity, right? A loss of all possible aim. And so it's represented as fire, right? So because it's breaking everything down, right? It's basically, turning everything to ash. But it's also pain, because that's what pain is. Pain is, you experience pain when you don't hit the mark, when you're not aligned properly. That's when we experience pain, whether it's physical pain or emotional or psychological pain. And so that is in some ways what hell is. In some ways, it's the extreme of death manifesting itself in an image of torture and pain and loneliness and separation. All of these images are in some ways images of what happens when you don't align yourself properly.
I love that definition of hell. And religious, or religion, as I'm sure you already know, and I might even learn from you, it comes from religio, which is to connect, I think, right? Is that what that is? So anything that's outside of that, or like divisiveness or disconnection or non-unicity, would be non-religion, I guess you'd say. So is, from your perspective, is hell a thing that is happening on this plane of reality, or is hell something that takes place after we leave our bodies as humans?
So it's something that's already there, I think. I think that hell is already present. In some ways, it's something that's always present because it is the extreme of something. So, but it is good to understand it as something happens when you end. It is good to understand it that way because it is the extreme version of what you're already going through. So people in this life, they're not completely in hell. Like there are varieties of hell that we can go through, varieties of suffering and pain and torture that we can either subject ourselves to or be subjected to. But when you get to the end of your life, the end of your life represents the fullness of you, right? So it's like, who are you? It will only be revealed when everything of you is over, you could say. So you live your life, you could say, I suspend judgment on you until you die, because who knows, right? At the end, on a deathbed, you might forgive your mother that you've been angry for forever, or you might resolve something that I don't know about you. Like you might confess a horrible thing you did that I don't know about. We might find out that you were a horrible person. Who knows, right? And so it's like, once you're done, like once everything is done, then there's a judgment on you, right? I can now judge you, like it, but it's not just you. Obviously, anything you do, right? If you're working in a job and you're doing a task, like I will suspend judgment until the end. Once you're done, then I can look at what you do and evaluate it. But that idea is that's why these eschatological images, so heaven, hell, these types of images, they're projected in the end because it's about the finality. It's about all of you. And so if all of you, how can I say this? If the culmination of you ends up in this complete chaos and complete fragmentation, then that would be imaged, the best way would be imaged as hell. So a good way of understanding is that once you end is when you reveal where you are, you could say, in terms of your soul, right? Where your soul is will be revealed at that last moment.
Do you believe in reincarnation?
Not in the kind of cliche idea of like your soul coming back. I don't even know what those things mean. Like I don't totally understand. I do believe in a kind, not a reincarnation, but I do believe in a kind of there's a way of understanding reincarnation in the sense that there are characteristics of us that do reincarnate. I don't think that you can avoid that, in the sense that your children are literally that. Like, right, you have children and then your soul imprints on them and they manifest aspects of your soul. And I do believe that some people, in some ways, you could call it psychic residue or psychic fallout. I don't know how else to call it. Like influence will affect the world after them. But I don't believe that your conscious state, like your conscious self, would return in another body, because at least Christians believe that you are your body. There isn't this sense that the soul can be completely and really separated from the body. That in fact the image of the end of you is resurrection, right? That's the image for Christianity. Is the idea is that there is a perfect version of you, but that's an embodied one. It's not a disembodied one. So there's a perfect body that is in some ways an extension of your body. It's not another body. It's not someone else's body. It's your body transformed. But that is really the way the Christians understand the finality of things, and not the cycle of the souls. I don't totally understand how that's possible. Like, I don't understand. Like, I know the theory, but it's like, I don't know what it is that's being reincarnated. Even in Buddhism, I don't understand what it is that's being reincarnated. I've actually asked a few people. It's like, if all there is impermanence, then what is being reincarnated? Like, what spirit, like what soul is being reincarnated? I don't understand what that is.
It seems to me the most logical thing after we die would make sense to me that it's kind of like a water drop back into the ocean type concept. So visually that makes sense to me. It's like the entire ocean inside of a drop. It's like we're a fractal for all things. That like is unicity, that is connection, that is religion. We actually are the totality of all things. And when we're in this body, like Alan Watts has a bit, like when you are incarnated, or whatever language you prefer, you're in a body, you're like a wave. And so the wave is surfacing, coming out of the ocean, and it's waving, and it's majestic, and it's beautiful, and it's called Chopu, and Laird Hamilton's surfing it, and it's iconic, and it's across all the magazines, and it's worshipped, and it's idolized, and then it just crashes back into the ocean, and it just goes through its cycle again. And I feel like the manifestation of a being in form seems to me like that analogy of like a wave coming up and then it goes back into the ocean. My question for people that investigate religious things and spiritual things is like, where is like you sit and reside within Christianity. One of the biggest kind of gaps for me with Christianity is the concept of hell. Do you believe that a person needs to accept Jesus, the literal, version of Jesus, as their savior in order to be passed through the gates of heaven, or else they'll be eternally damned to this place called hell?
I definitely don't believe in that kind of reductionist vision of things. Let's say if we take your image of the wave and the one, there is, you could say, a way in which that is true, but at least this is at least the Christian position, is that the wave, it has a reality. It actually has a reality that as Christians we would say is formed in love. That is, God creates beings out of love. So the one, or the ocean, if you want to think about it, in some ways, it wants, or it loves so much that love boils over in the actual existence of individual beings. And those individual beings are not illusions, right? They're not just like little bubbles that pop. They actually they're given by God's love a true existence, right? And maybe that's the difference. And so although we do go back into, we're called back to God, like we're called to be united with God. For Christians, that call back to God never annuls your individual existence, because of love, right? And love, the best way to understand love is to understand it as the possibility of unity and multiplicity to coexist together, right? That is the structure of love. So it's in some ways, if I love something, I don't want it to be united with me completely. I want it to be united with me as much as possible, but I don't want to unite it to me in order to annul it, in order to absorb it, right? I want it to continue exist as separate from me, because then love can continue. Right? I want my lover to be separate from me. I don't want to suck her into me, like completely absorb her into me, because I want to be able to continue loving that person, right? And so that is that is in some ways is the image of Christianity. Now, you're right that in some ways what that does is there's a side effect to that, which is that we are made free, right? God in some ways makes us separate from him through love, but it means that he can't control us completely, or he doesn't want to control us. He wants to let us be free so that we can have true and mutual love between each other. And that means that there's always a possibility that you can refuse. And that is what hell is. Like, hell is humans refusing God's love, basically. And that is something that is possible for all of us. All of us can either accept or refuse God's love. And that's how I see it. Of course, I do believe that Christ revealed the fullness of that. I do believe that in some ways Christ revealed that to us. But I don't believe that if someone isn't born in America or in Europe, and that everybody that was born before the actual church goes to hell, like I can't really think that. I do believe that in some ways Christ reveals the path, but that path is in him. And how you explain it technically in some ways is irrelevant, but the idea is that all people are free to choose God's love or to not choose God's love.
Yeah, that's the part that kind of breaks me from religion, and I think that's the part that literally breaks from the like an etymological perspective, if that's a word, breaks the religio. Like, it creates divisiveness and disconnection, and that's where I kind of like respectfully step off the train. But that's not. I don't even think I'm right. It's just, to me, it's just intuitively, I'm like, I just don't. That just doesn't feel reasonable to me. That person that's super generous and sweet and amazing and beautiful and just doing everything she or he can to just do right by the world and all of that. But they happen to have grown up in a Muslim culture, and they just don't hear these stories. Like, they're all internally damned. It's very challenging for me to be able to grok or digest.
Well, usually the way that, at least in Orthodox Christianity, the way that we formulate it is we formulate it just as the positive way. In some ways, I think C.S. Lewis had also given a great example of that, which is, someone who's sick comes to you and asks you, what's the best way to get to the hospital? And then I say, this road, take this road. It'll lead you straight to the hospital. And then the person says, yeah, but can I take the other road? Like, could I also maybe like take this other road? And you're like, well, do you want to get to the hospital or not? Like, what is the question that's being asked here? And so I think that's the way that I like to think about it, which is that in Orthodox Christianity, we say, ask me how it is to come into full communion with God. And I'll tell you, this is the way. Now, don't ask me, are there maybe possible exceptions of people that could be taken another way and maybe they'll still get there? Like, why are you asking that? Like, what is motivating that question? I mean, we usually just say, I don't know. And it's not for me to judge that. Why would I ask? There's no existential reason to ask myself about other people in other places. I want to get to the hospital. Like, I want to be healed. I want to be free from my slaveries. I want to be free from my passions. And if you want that, I can say, this is the way. Like, this is a way. And I see it because I see the saints, because I see all these people that are free, that aren't living under the weight of all their obsessions and passions and whatever. I see these free people. I'm like, this is this is the path that I see. So this is the way that I tend to present it. And it's not a speculative question, right? In some ways, it's an existential question. It's more about, because when you all just frame it as whether or not you go to heaven or hell, that's why I don't like those formulations so much, because I really do prefer in some ways to talk about now and here, because the question is, you have obsessions, you have sins, you have things that weigh you down, you have thoughts that take over, you have you have excesses in your life. Do you want to be free from those? And if the answer is yes, and it's like, this is the way, right? Jesus shows you the way to be free, and that leads to heaven. But it's a real thing. It's not like what you believe something and then you die, you go to heaven. That's nonsense. Like, what is that even? I don't even know what that even means. Like, I don't even know what that would be. You have to become something, right? You have to be transformed. You have to become free of your passions, and it's not just believing something and then you die and go to eternal bliss. Like, we're not Muslims. The Christians are not Muslims. Like, there's a lot of stuff that it's weird how there's actually a lot of stuff in certain types of Protestant Christianity, which seem to be much closer to the way that Muslims think about, right? Say this phrase, say that there's only one God, and Muhammad is his prophet. Say that, and it means that you're fine, like you're good to go. That's not how any of this stuff works.
What do you think about God being a jealous God and some of those personality traits that I would identify with someone that would not be so omnipotent? Most of the most omnipotent humans I know, where you're just like, wow, you're just handling business, they don't really give a shit. Follow me, don't follow me. Like, this is the way, we're chill. Like, how do you describe some of the kind of more like seemingly like reactive behavior of God in the Bible?
Well, especially in the Old Testament, for sure. Uh, a good way of understanding God in the Old Testament is in some ways to notice it's almost like God refracted in multiple narratives. So you have different aspects of God that are manifested in different stories. So God manifests himself this way, this way, this way, and then it's kind of culminating towards a revelation of the fullness of God, which we believe happens in Christ. And so the jealousy of God is important, but it can't just be that, right? So you have on the one hand the image of the jealous God, but then you also have in the same Bible the image of God that says that my spirit will fill all things, that my spirit will fill all people. So you have these two images. So you say, well, what's the reason for the jealous God? And the reason is to manifest the relationship. Like, it's to manifest it even in some ways as a proper relationship of one belonging to the other, right? And so this idea that we do belong to God, that we do belong to our Creator. We're not completely independent. Like, we are independent for God. We can say yes or no to that relationship, but that ultimately we do belong to God, and that God has, you could say, a right over us. And you could see that. It's funny because you could see it in the negative way, but you could also see it in the positive way. Like, there is an aspect of jealousy which is positive. And I know that's hard for normal, like, people today to understand, but if you're married, you should have a certain amount of jealousy. You have the right, you need the right balance, because you have to express you have to express the covenant. You have to express that you care about this person, and that you're in some ways willing to act to prevent the couple from falling apart. And people who don't have a little bit, like, let's say, a reasonable amount of jealousy, usually those relationships don't last forever. They usually at some point end. But if you want a relationship that lasts your whole life, you need a little bit of jealousy. But like I said, right balance. And I think so. Those stories, what they do is they, in some ways, express that aspect of the real, but they're always balanced with other aspects of how God is.
What do you see as the most dangerous modern idol that we are worshiping as a culture and perhaps not realizing it?
There's no surprise. It's money, for sure. Money is the one that Christ called out as being, the one that people easily worship. And so that is definitely one. I think that now there's a tension that has been it's the one that I have to deal with a lot, right? It's like, because I'm on YouTube and making videos and everything. And so how do we in some ways participate in attention without it becoming our identity, without it kind of, taking over? At least for me, that's my little God that I have to deal with and struggle with. Those are definitely, and then also, I mean, all of the passions I've taken over, in some ways, for sure. The let's say the different Venus is unleashed, you could say, in the world, and and power, the usual ones. It's nothing new, nothing secret.
How do you manage that within yourself? Is that something that you see? Do you see certain levels of like sins arise within yourself in your observation of numbers on YouTube videos and things of the sort? Do you have judgment on yourself within that?
The great thing about, at least I really appreciate, Orthodox Christianity is that you have to go to confession. And so going to confession is a very useful tool for you to basically have to ask yourself, okay, so what are the things that are taking over me? What are the things that I'm tempted to let take over my attention? And so, but there are, in some ways, there's a simple solution. It's annoying because it's so simple. It's basically, remember God, remember death. Those two things. If you could do that all the time, then probably you would be fine. Because a lot of the things we chase after, they're useful tools, but they're vain in themselves. I mean, this attention or the money or whatever it is that we chase, or power, it's not that they're not evil in themselves. They can be used as tools to do good, but as soon as you try to catch them for themselves, they're vain. And so remembering that you could die at any time, or that death is coming, I think that's a useful way. And then also remembering God, in the sense that in some ways you remember the highest. You remember that what it is, what am I aiming at, right? What are my actions aimed at? And so if you can keep your eye up, then hopefully things kind of stack up, where you were like, okay, in the hierarchy of things that lead me, to be closer to God, maybe my family is more important than my job. And then maybe in my job, there are certain things that are more important, that serve a higher good, and others that are kind of distractions or temptations.
What is the point of having this ongoing dynamic tension of good and evil. It seems like it's kind of holding our Constitution together in a way. And if we were just set in unicity, and like it was like the perfect geometrical shape was aligned. It was kind of like, oh, what are we doing here? It seems like we kind of like this, like cat mouse or chasing the ball around game. Like, what is evil?
Let's take the perfect aligned geometric shape, right? And so you can actually understand evil from that perspective, because evil usually comes from that state. So everything's perfectly aligned and everything is all well, and you're also everything is good and everything is just in line, and then the thought comes and says, that's pretty good. I got it. I got it. Like, I've got this. And that's the beginning of sin right away, right? It's the beginning of evil. So evil, in some ways, it's not that complicated. Evil is when you put something in the wrong place, right? That's what evil is. And so when you misalign, when something is aligned and in its proper place, then all things are good. But if you put something in its improper place, then that's when evil arises, because it's trying to do something that it can't do, right? So that's a good understanding of sin and of evil. And so we talked about jealousy before. So you could say the desire to express ownership, like the desire to be connected to something, is something that exists in the human. It's not evil in itself. It's a part of us. Now the question is, at what level do you want that to be true? So you have your children, and then you feel responsible for them, and you feel protective of them. And that is a completely not only normal, it's a good thing. But then if you misplace it, if you have excess and you become too jealous or too protective or too controlling, then it becomes a sin. And so all sins and all evil is always in excess of something good. It's always something good that's being twisted in the wrong direction. But it usually comes from an aspect of us thinking that it's good in itself. So that's why sitting in the perfect place is actually one of the positions in which sin or evil can start. Because I start to think that, look at me. I'm totally united to the one. I got it. It's like, well, you're not the one anymore if you start thinking that you're united to the one. Now, are you?
Is the concept of good and evil just become placing language on just like the natural progression of life? As things go into order, into chaos, order into entropy, and then we label entropy as evil and we label order as good, and we kind of can put ourselves into like a
Entropy is necessary, right? So like the capacity for things to move into multiplicity is necessary, because if without that, there's no love. Again, right? We bring, God creates multiplicity, and so this movement into multiplicity can be seen as a kind of ecstatic motion into the many. But it's when entropy, you could say, it's when entropy pretends to be the one. It's when the multiple pretend or think or misalign themselves in thinking that they're sufficient. That's when evil starts, and that's when things start to twist and start to fall apart.
and it would apply the same as when organization starts to think it's the one then.
Yeah, of course, any organization has that problem too. So I mean, that's one of the things that we say, like, for example, as from the Orthodox perspective, we're like, the Pope is acting a little bit too much like he thinks he's God on earth. Like, that seems like we have an issue there. I mean, I could argue with the Catholics on that front, but there is a danger. That's why, authority is necessary, but it can never be total. If you want to understand, let's say, how evil works, you can think about let's say, a police force, and then you have a police force that serves a certain purpose. Oh, good idea. Let's use a better one. Let's use the FBI, right? So you have a federal police force, and that federal police force is there to serve the the good of the nation. And then all of a sudden, in that force, you have some people that start to think that, in fact, this police force is there to serve their purposes, another purpose. Who knows what it is? Some other purpose, some other interest, some other reason, and then they start to act within that organization in order to corrupt it, right, to their own purposes. And then you start to see evil appear. And the evil is objective. It means that now the organization is corrupt. It's not actually acting towards the purpose for the reason why it exists in the first place. And then it starts to break apart, and it starts to, all these bad things start to happen. It starts to, let's say, it starts to be tyrannical, and then it starts to fragment, and it starts to be tyrannical because it's actually lost its purpose. And you can apply that to anything, like anything that you do. And I'm sure, like, even in your world, like in the world of health and of like, let's say, physical exercise, you see people that go down a weird path, and then they kind of, they twist things in a way that actually now becomes harmful to their body. Like people who, let's say, do physical health just to look good at some point, and then they start to cut things in their face, and they start to do all this stuff. They start to inject Botox or whatever, and you're like, wait a minute, physical health isn't just about looking good. It's part of it, but if you just make it about that, then it leads you down a path that is sinful, and then it starts to actually break things down, and things stop to be coherent.
Is there such a thing as a materialized evil, or is evil a concept for something that exists within all beings? Is there such a thing as, oh, he is evil? Does that exist?
We have, obviously, we have this idea of the evil one. Like, we definitely have this idea of the devil, or Satan, as a figure, but evil itself doesn't properly exist. That's what's hard to get to, is that evil doesn't have positive existence. It's only negative. That is, it's only lack of, it's only a, so it's taking something good and misaligning it. And so the only thing that exists is the good. The evil is like a whole. It's like it doesn't actually have being. And that's really important, like in Christian metaphysics, to understand that being doesn't have a positive existence. It's not like there's good and there's evil. Is there's good, and then evil is like a parasite. It's like a momentary twisting. But that momentary twisting can't last forever, because the world has a certain shape. So take a police force again, the FBI, let's say, and it gets corrupt. It's like at some point that will destroy the organization if it continues on forever, and therefore it will lead the FBI to cease existing, and then something new will have to appear. So the evil doesn't have a positive existence. Like, it's, in some ways, it's only the good that's being diminished, you could say, is a good way of thinking about it that way.
This is for a YouTube clip. Is Jeffrey Epstein evil?
Jeffrey evil. I mean, he is definitely an interesting figure to think about in terms of evil, because if you think about the things that he did, not just the things that he did, but everything that he seems to be representing, seems to definitely be a kind of culmination of evil. And the reason is because obviously there's the actual acts that he was doing, let's say the abuse of the young girls, but then those acts seem to be embedded in a type of corruption that appears at many levels of our society, because it seems to be the state also twisting its resources towards something that is obscure, that we don't totally understand what it is. And it seems to be huge, vast amounts of money that are being twisted towards something that is obscure, and we don't know exactly what it is. And all of those layers are, I think, why people are so stuck on understanding what it is that's going on there, because the revelation of this figure seems to be exposing rot at multiple levels of society. And that's why everybody wants to get to the bottom of it, because they're like, if there's sin, that type of sin at the individual, at the elite level, at the government level, at the international level, if that's what's going on, we want to root it out, and so that's why I think he's such a magnet for attention.
Why do you think civilizations collapse right after achieving peak abundance? And where do you think the United States is in their abundance arc?
there is a error that we make, which is to make abundance the goal. Once you think that that's the goal, then you're wrong. Abundance isn't the goal. Abundance is a tool to do the good. But if you make abundance the purpose, if you have this idea, you remember George Bush when 9/11 happened, first thing he said, what did he say? Go shopping, right? And right, this idea that that economy is the thing that is the most important. All of these things are wrong. All these things are mistakes. And so I think that that's the temptation we have, is to in some ways think that if we have abundance and we'll be satiated. But everybody knows that that's not true. There is no satiation in our desires. Our desires are infinite. And so I think that that's one of the problems. The idea of that the purpose of civilization is to reach this abundance, I think, is already a mistake. And then in the reach for abundance, or in the arriving at abundance, there is a perversion in that which leads to the decline of civilization, which is that it makes us lazy, and then we become lazy and we stop to attend because we're just so gorged that we stop to attend to what's happening, and it makes us fragile, and it makes us not need our neighbor. It makes us not love our neighbor, and therefore we become fragmented, and then we're just the prey for anything that's pointed and unified that comes from the outside. So I think that that's what happened with the Roman Empire. There are many examples in the past of how it collapses. And actually, I know this is going to sound weird to many people, but I think the fact that there's a culture war in the United States, it's really annoying. And it looks like, because of that, it looks like the United States is it's like in trouble all the time, right? It looks like it's always on the verge of collapsing. But I think it's actually a sign of that there's still some health and still some life in your country, whereas in Canada or in Europe, it's just one way, buddy. Like, everything's just going in one direction, and everything's just kind of happening, and nobody has any agency, and nobody's talking about what's going on. So I do have hope that maybe in the United States there could be something that could get us through, whatever's going on. Maybe.
Hatred is just the opposite pole of adoration. I don't know if I could say the exactly opposite pole. I don't know if that exactly makes sense. But if you hate someone, you love someone. Like, you hold, there's emotional content. You are entwined with that person. If it's neutrality that stings the most.
Yeah, this just basic, like, just we don't know what's happening. It's just happening to us. And so, yeah, so there, hopefully that's the case. But I think there's no doubt that we are in end of empire times. Like, I don't think anybody can really deny that the signs of rot are becoming pretty are becoming obvious, and that we're definitely at the end of something. I sometimes think so maybe at the end of the Enlightenment narrative, we're at the end of that whole kind of civilizational moment. And so hopefully there'll be some kind of renewal. It's not impossible that that renewal can happen. We tend to think that it just leads to collapse. There are moments of renewal. Like, if you look at the transition, for example, between the Roman Republic and the Empire, whether you agree with the structure or not, there is a renewal that happened there, right? So there is a moment where it felt like it was just over, like it was all gonna collapse and things were going to shatter, and then there is a kind of renewal, and that renewal end up lasting a few centuries, which isn't bad. It's not Egypt or anything, but it's not bad. So it seems like it is possible that there could be some kind of renewal in the West, but this is not a prediction for sure.
It's inevitable. I mean, I think that's the ongoing until things stop, and then when they stop, they'll get renewed again.
Yeah, no, but I mean, there's renewal, and then there's you could say being swallowed by something else, being eaten by something else. I'm talking about inner renewal, but it is no, obviously nothing goes away. So when the Romans destroyed Carthage, it's like the Carthaginian Empire stopped existing, but then it became the Roman Empire. So it's like if the West gets taken over, destroyed, or it'll still, the people will just be joined to another identity. I tend to like our story. I would like it to be renewed, to be honest. I don't want to become something else, you know.
What is the, from your perception, what is the symbolic meaning of gender confusion in our culture?
It is the end of the individualism, you could say. There are several aspects of the end of individualism. So if you think about how the nation states are, at some point became prideful, right? And then they started to now fragment into this weird globalist thing. The same thing happened with gender. In some ways, there was, in the 20th century, there was an excess of gender. So it's weird because when you think of the 1950s, a lot of like the traditional Christian types, they like, they want to go back to that, to the post-war kind of 1950s. The man goes to work, the woman stays at home, takes care of the kids, and it's this like system of how things work. That is not a traditional system. It's actually just not. And then there was crazy. They did crazy stuff like they would chemically castrate homosexuals, and like they made it into a disease where they would basically put people in treatment and stuff like that. So there was in some ways a kind of excess of crystallizing of gender that happened in the modern age, and also there was also a worshiping of masculinity that happened at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and even at the beginning of the 20th century. And this kind of idea that in some ways the female aspect of the world was something to just be dominated or to just be controlled, and all of that. And so it's not surprising that after that came a kind of roar, like a feminist roar, you could say. It's like, no, we matter too, like this raging. But that's not healthy either, right? These two excesses, they're not healthy. And what it led to ultimately is to a breakdown. And so now gender is basically confused because we've just had too much, the pendulum swaying, and now it's just basically kind of breaking down. So what would be nice would be to have a recapturing or refounding of the value of masculinity and the value of femininity in their own right, and kind of understand those two as being complementary and powerful.
With how things are going in the world, how do you see the next 5 to 10 years in the United States or in North America or like westernized culture looking? What is your predictions for where are we on the cusp of something right now? And I realize that we like to believe that we're on the cusp of something just perennially and always. Are we actually on the cusp of something right now?
It depends, of course, on the things we do, but there is a sense in which there's a kind of Weimar, vibe that has been around for about 10 years. So in some ways, this gender confusion and this kind of internationalism where we don't know who we are, right? There's a kind of confusion about who we are as people, who we are in gender, who we are as nations, all of these things. Of course, that is untenable, and it tends to call for a new centralization. So that is the thing, in some ways, that I see happening, is that there'll be a movement towards a kind of new, more vitalistic or centralizing tendency. I'm not sure exactly how it's going to play out. Obviously, my biggest fear is a temptation to return to repeat the Weimar crash, you could say, something like that. And there are a few hints of that, because there's a tendency in some circles to be, let's say, seduced by fascistic imagery again, and to try to say, well, maybe we were wrong, like maybe the other side got it right. I don't believe that's the solution, but that's the kind of thing that's right. And you see it because of the war in Ukraine and the war in Palestine and Iran, all of that. The World War II kind of consensus is shaking like it's never shaken before, right? Everything is just we're in a narrative spin cycle, and it's not clear where it's gonna stop. And anything's possible. People think that the people that were languishing in watching drag shows in Weimar, they didn't imagine what was coming, because people think that things always just go in one direction, but that's not how it functions. And so this is all of this is what's shaking right now. And so hopefully, I mean, what I'm trying to do, and I hopefully some people, other people are trying to, in some ways, be a voice of mediation. We're trying to get back to a middle rather than a swing.
So you have been creating, how do you call it? Like children's books? What's the term for
Yeah,
that?
so one of the things I've been doing recently in the past, let's say 3 years, is rewriting fairy tales. And it's one of the reasons why I'm doing that is exactly for the reasons that I'm saying, is that in some ways the fairy tales were captured in the past few decades. They became political tools to bring about a certain vision of reality. And so, but now all of that's kind of collapsing, right? Because in some ways people don't like propaganda, people don't like being, preached to. And so now the even Disney's dropping the fairy tales. They don't really want them anymore. They don't know what to do with them because they tried to make them kind of woke, but it's not working. And so what do we do? And so it seemed to me like one of the things that was worth doing was to go back into the fairy tales and retell them with a kind of celebratory spirit, and also a vibrancy that shows all the elements, right? And so it's like the value of all the different elements, the value of the female character, the male character, the value of the danger of overly over centralization, the opportunity of centralization, the danger of chaos and fragmentation, but also the power of exploration and moving out into the wild. So trying to kind of tell the fairy tales in a way that encompasses the full story and doesn't only rely on let's say one vision, one kind of closed-minded vision.
It seems to me like I really enjoy the analogy of a tree going into fall and the leaves falling and they go back down to the ground and they decompose and they do the thing and then it's dark and it's winter and then the light is darkest just before the dawn. Just another metaphor, not necessarily pertaining to the tree, but kind of. And then spring comes and it's blossoming and it's amazing and there's bunnies and it's great. And if you were to try to stop fall from happening, and Ram Dass has a bit of, he relates this to aging. A person, we have the story or the myth that aging is bad, particularly for women. Guys, you kind of have, a little like gray fox
A bit
thing.
more.
It's all stories.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, but if so, that is the disease, that is the sin, I believe, because that creates contraction and separateness.
No, I think your insight is absolutely right. There are these natural cycles that are happening, and they're happening both in your life and civilizationally. They're happening at all these different scales, and the engaging it in the right way is really the best way to do it. And there's a good way to be in all of these moments, right? There's a good way to be. So a good example would be aging is exactly a good example. So if you realize what aging means and you embody it properly, so you can do two things. You can be in aging, you can try to remain young as much as possible, right? And take your son's girlfriend, like you could do that, right? And if you're doing that, then you're leading yourself towards a crash, right? You're going to head towards a cliff because at some point that's going to drop off. Like I don't know when, but at some point it's going to drop off. But then there's also a way that you can age, and then when you become old, you become a guide, you become a mentor. You kind of help your son, go teach him the wisdom of what you've learned in life and how to deal with his girlfriend. Don't try to take his girlfriend from him. And so that's just an image to say that in every part of the story, there are ways to be that, let's say, lead towards the greatest good. And there are ways to be in each aspect that uh, can lead towards collapse or towards corruption. You could call it.
Yeah, I appreciate we can kind of wind down. I appreciate that you are going in the direction of actually creating tales, and because I believe that is the most digestible way to be able to communicate complex messages. I think there's like a natural progression of that. Things go from simplicity to complexity to back to simplicity again. And I think the fairy tale is like really like kind of the ultimate version of, you can get a lot of deep education and wisdom from a fairy tale, much more oftentimes than something that seems in the face very complex, where you have to kind of extrapolate and figure it out. Is there a place where people can go? You have books presently like out?
Yeah. So we have 3 books out. People can go to the symbolicworld.com. That's where, right now we're selling them. They're going to be available on Amazon too, but the best place to get them is on our website. And so we have 8 stories that we're going to tell in a kind of fairy tale series. Therefore, you can read them to a 4-year-old, but as an adult, I'm also writing them for adults. There's insights in there that are for grown-ups as well. And so so that's right. I love how you put it. In some ways, I do believe that it's a time to come back to a kind of original story, to kind of move away from the madness on the edge and to kind of capture things in simple format. And that's true, that's one of the great things fairy tales can do.
Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed that episode, you might also enjoy this episode over here, as well as this one over here. Thank you for subscribing. Appreciate you. I'll see you in the next video.